All right, thank you very much, everyone, for joining another webinar, the second phase of webinar. And this one is going to be SAS Viya Cloud Analytical Services in Clinical Trials, focusing on SAS Viya and what CAS Engine can do for clinical trials. My name is Vasily Nevlev. I'm director at Analytium. Analytium is data and analytics consultancy and SaaS partner. And my pleasure to introduce you to Nikolai Varapau, who is a qualified doctor and a SaaS consultant at Analytium, who will talk you through the SAS Viya Cloud Analytical Services. Nikolai, over to you.
Thank you very much. So hello to everyone, and welcome to our webinar. In our webinar, we're gonna speak about SAS Viya Cloud Analytical Services and how then can be used in clinical trials. So before going to agenda, I would like to say what is the goal of the whole webinar. Well, SAS Viya is a new platform, a relatively new platform developed by SAS, and CAS, or Cloud Analytical Service, is maybe a main or one of main parts of this new platform. And from our view, CAS can and should be used in clinical trials. And that's why we decided to make this webinar. Now let's go to agenda. In our agenda, first of all, we're going to speak about what are cloud analytical services. Then we're going to speak about how potential use of cloud analytical services in clinical trials. And then we have two short demo. The first demo about how to use kind of how programmers can use cloud analytical services. And the second is a short make-up example of using cloud analytical services in clinical trials. So let's go. Finally, we have a Q&A section at the end. So before going to cloud analytical services, we have to speak about what is SAS Viya. And SAS Viya basically is a kind of, again, relatively new, modern, cloud-based platform developed by SAS for data management tasks and for data analytics and statistical analysis. And SAS Viya essentially kind of has two main parts. One is called SPRE, or SAS Programming Runtime Environment, where users can see this as a SAS9, and SAS9 code can be written and executed in this environment. And the second kind of environment, or the second part, is called Cloud Analytical Services. And in Cloud Analytical Services is actually, we have what is called controller and server workers. And Cloud Analytical Services were designed for large data sets and complex analytics. From this slide, I also would like to kind of point out that client cannot directly connect to CAS. They can connect only to SPRE, and through SPRE then can go to, they can get connected to CAS. Now let's dig deeper into Cloud Analytical Service. So it's important that Cloud Analytical Service assigns essentially three roles for the pieces of hardware, either for separate servers or processors or CPUs. And these are three roles: controllers, backup controllers, and workers. I would like to start from workers. So basically, workers as a kind of separate unit that processed and analyzed data that that usually are sent to worker by controller. And after analysis, workers sent data back to controllers. Controllers, on the other hand, can be seen as a central command unit of CAS. So a controller accepts connection from clients. It's partition data and kind of sends data to workers and control workers and accepts result from workers. And then we have a backup controller. Backup controllers basically provide, and they can kind of compose of fault-tolerant systems, because SAS Viya is fault-tolerant platform. This role is important because they play critical role in the architecture of class that we're going to see in the next slide. So now we have we see that class can run on a single machine, on a cluster of machines. And if it's a single machine, it's called single mode. And if it's cluster, it's called distributed mode. In a single machine, technically one processor is a controller and other processors play a role as workers. And in computation, symmetric multiprocessing approach is used. And it's important to know that users can combine multiple single machines, but from kind of my perspective, I don't really understand why users should do this. In distributed actually mode, separate machines are selected for different roles. One machine is a controller, another machine is a back controller, and other machine is a workers. And again, it's possible to combine multiple cluster of machines in one big super cluster, and basically it make process extremely large and huge data sets or extremely complex computations. But how programmers can work with one more important point. All this done to let users compute complex and large data sets in parallel. And this makes computation much faster and much more efficient. But how users can communicate with SAS? Well, first of all, I would like to say that there is a language called CASL, the SAS language that directly interacts with SAS. And this language actually essentially has a set of action. And basically, this is a set of commands that we can direct on SAS to perform statistical or data task management steps. For example, we have a regression set of actions or data table management set of actions. We can, for example, change columns, change format. And then we have what is concept of variable arrays and dictionaries. And in this kind of variables, arrays, and dictionaries, we can store parameters, then we can feed in our set of action. For example, we can store, for example, a set of parameters in array, and then we can, for example, execute a regression action. So we can do regression analysis with this is a set of parameters. It's important to stress out that only proc CAS procedure allows user to directly communicate with CAS, and this option is available only for CAS users. And I also want to say that CAS language is relatively easy, so it's not hard to learn this language. So it's very similar to Python. But for SAS users, there are modified data step in CAS-enabled procedure can be used. CAS-enabled procedure are very similar to procedures that are used in SAS 9, but it's important to to point that behind the scenes, CAS-enabled procedure and data steps, they converted to Castle, and then Castle commands interact with Castle server. And for SAS users, the main interface is SAS Studio. It is important to know that open source environments can also be connected to CAS, and it's done through what is called connectors. But again, keep in mind that when you connect, for example, Python to CAS through connectors, in this case, we use a special library. Connectors basically turn the code into Castle language, and then this Castle language fit to CAS. Now, let's look at what step should be done in order to work with CAS. So, as I showed earlier from this, clients cannot directly connect themselves to CAS. They connect themselves to Spree. And then to start working with CAS programmatically, we have to start CAS session. Then we have to create a CAS library or CAS libs. It is important to understand that CAS libs differ from kind of the same lib names in SAS 9, and I will later explain how they differ. Then we have to load data into CAS. It's important that CAS can consume only data that is in memory of CAS. Only in-memory data can be processed and analyzed with CAS. Then we can process and analyze data. And again, remember that at the heart of CAS computation, there is what is called multi-threaded computation. So we partition data and send data to different nodes, workers, and then collate them back. As a result of this, computation in CAS differs from that of SAS 9. Then we have to save results and data, and if we need, we have to terminate session. Now let's speak about when to use CAS. This is a kind of an often question, very frequent questions, whether basically CAS is much better than, for example, Spree or open environments. And the answer is no. CAS has kind of CAS is suitable for very specific tasks. So if, for example, you have data sets larger than 50 gigabytes, or if kind of time to compute something is more than 30 minutes in Spree, in such scenarios, probably CAS is a very good candidate. But if you have smaller data sets, or it's relatively simple statistic or data analysis, then Spree can be faster and more effective. This is because in order to initiate and to start working with CAS, several overhead processes should be initiated. First of all, we have to start required services. Then we have to load data into CAS. Then we have to distribute data to workers. We have to process data, monitor data processing, and collate and deliver result to the client. And as everyone can understand, it usually takes time to do all these processes. So, for example, that's why for smaller data sets, it's been more efficient to use Spree or open environment. Okay, now we are approaching our first demo. And the goal of this demo, just to show the flavor of CAS, how communicate with CAS. It has nothing to do with clinical trials programming. So it's just about what is SAS and how to work with SAS programmatically. Okay, so we're gonna switch to, yeah. First of all, I have to sign to the company, our company, SAS Viya. It's an old version, 3.5. So it takes some time when it's going to be connected. So yes, I'm going to go. Yeah, I'm going to change tab layout to a single. So, as you remember from my slides, we have to start working with CAS. We have to start a CAS session, but it's a good practice, for example, to terminate session, because if you work very often, you may forget to terminate previous session. So usually it's a good practice to start not from the statement to start session, but with the statement to terminate session. So let's play this two statement. So it throws an error, but this error expected because basically I terminated my last session, so there is no my session now, and that's why this error was thrown. But then my session was created successfully. You can read this in the second line. So also I would like to point out that if you look at libraries of SAS libraries, we don't see my CAS session. And to see my CAS session, we have to explicitly state this in the code. That's why we have to play this line of code in order to see my CAS user library, CASLib, among other SAS libraries. So I'm gonna play. And now we can see CAS user. I want to say that the symbol is different. It's a cloud with a snowflake. So the next, we can create other libraries if we need. For example, we can create library for specified path. And this in this statement, I wanted to create a CASLib with kind of path to my home directory. And in this statement, when I create this library, I am already gonna create as well as libref to see my new CASLib among other SAS libraries. So we're gonna run. Yeah, now you can see that we have my CASLib as well among other SAS libraries. Then I would like to speak a bit more about CASLibs because it's a very important concept. But before this, I would like to run this code. You see the first time when we use proc CAS procedure. And in this proc procedure, I actually use table CASLib info to get information about my CASLibs. Because this information has very important aspects that we have to discuss in this webinar. So you see that the result of this action is a table, and this table has a list of CASLibs, but basically I created only 2 of them. Other CASLibs were basically created by SAS when I started my session. It is important to know that CASLibs have attributes, and these attributes quite important. I would like to pay attention to draw attention to basically kind of 3 attributes: local, active, and personal. First of all, let's speak about active. Active attribute. So if by default the last created CASLib is active, and active CASLib is all, but you can use any CASLib is not active. And the difference that if users want to use non-active CASLib, they always should use the name of CASLibs for tables or files. while if users use active CASLib, they can only use table names or file names. The second attribute is also important, is what is called local. And you see that my CASLib is local, and that's important. If CASLib local, it means that all in-memory tables can exist only during the session. So as soon as a session terminates, all my in-memory tables disappears. If it's global, in-memory tables can persist beyond my session. And if and then we go to another attribute, personal. So if, for example, my CASLib is global and it's not personal, it basically means that other users can also access my in-memory tables. Also important to understand that CASLibs are quite different from those from SAS 9. And SAS itself kind of says that CASLibs basically is a container with two parts. The first part is in-memory tables, and the second part is actually a reference parse to a storage place where files or tables can be kept. So it's a different, you have two parts. The first part is in memory tables, and the second part is a reference or path to a specific storage place where tables or other tables and file can be kept. And this is important. Given the importance of these CASLibs, it's the best practice is to use documentation and to learn about kind of this concept. Okay, the next step, we have to load data. As you remember, CAS can process only data that is in memory. It can't process data that is located somewhere else. And in CAS, data can be divided in two kind of types. The first type, what is called client-side data, and the second is the server-side data. Interestingly enough, server-side data is a data that is included in one of CASLibs. So in this case, we have a CASLib that is pointing to home, my home directory. And this data is considered as a server side only, but with one important addition: if CAS has access to this place or this storage. In my case, CAS doesn't have storage, so it can be upload data, but it's done because of configuration of our kind of cloud kind of platform and our CAS. But we can, so in order to work with data, we have to load data in CAS. And the easiest way to do this is use what is called proc CAS util. So in this case, we're gonna run this code. So you see there is no errors. And if we go in my CASLib, we can see that now we have a table. So in code, we actually load a table from SAS help cars into my CASLib under the name car CAS. And we use replace. So to replace, if the same table exists, we have to replace this. But if we try to load server-side data in my CASLib, CAS throws an error because CAS, unfortunately, again, because of security, has no access to this folder. But let's see. You see the error. You don't have permission to access, but it's possible to make configuration changes, and then CAS can get access to, for example, my home folder. So as soon as data in CAS, we can use some procedures, data steps to analyze data. So again, because it's just overview of using CAS, so I'm do very simple procedure. In this case, I simply want to calculate average mile per gallon per city for different car makers and different types. And then I'm going to print results of my very simple calculation. So you see, I also would like to stress out that the second procedure is not from CAS, it's from SPRI. So in results, you see, it seems that sedan consume in almost all car makers, sedans consume the largest amount of fuel per mile in city. Then if, for example, then we have to save our data. As you remember, if our scope is local, as soon as we terminate our session, in-memory table disappear. That's why we have to save our in-memory tables. And because I have only one place where I can save this, so I'm going to save my in-memory tables as a CSV file in caslib cas users. So you see there is no error. And then we have a procedure to see what files I have under my different caslib. So this is pros casutip. Then I specify my caslib, and then I specify statement list all my files. And if you see that this cas user caslib now has my cars table, then let's terminate our session. So we terminate our session. You see all my caslibs disappears, so we don't have any tables. But if I restart my session, again, it's throw error, but it's expected error because I terminate my session earlier. And then again, I'm gonna list my files under this cas user caslib. We can see this table was preserved, so I have my tables. So because I don't need this table anymore, then I'm gonna delete this table. And again, I use procas util. It's probably the easiest way to work with loading and uploading data. So I'm gonna statement delete source, specify the name of my file and my caslib. I'm run this procedure. And after that, I am going to, again, look at my cas user caslib to see what files I have. And if you see, there is no cars table anymore, so it disappeared. And now I'm going to terminate my session. Okay, this is it for the first short demo. Now we have to go a bit for the second part of the webinar. So, but the main questions, when and in what circumstances we should use cloud analytical services in clinical trials. I have to admit that classical clinical trials usually do not generate large data sets, and statistical analysis kind of are not extremely complex. What I mean by classical kind of clinical trials, for example, when we have to test a new drug. So yeah, and in such cases, I think SAS9 is a good candidate. But we have basically two areas where it is going to be very difficult not to use CAS. The first is what is called adaptive clinical trials. It's a kind of a new development in clinical research. But basically, in this design, we initially planned trial as adaptive, and we plan what is called interim analysis. And when we do our interim analysis, we then modify our trials. For example, we can change the sample size, we can change treatments. So these adaptive clinical trials have their own problems. One of them is preserving type 1 error. As a result, regulators require to do extensive statistical simulation. And in some cases, you can't even submit this adaptive clinical trial without simulation. And if you have to do statistical clinical simulation, then you may need computational power. And this cloud analytical service can be a very good candidate. The second, maybe even more important, is medical device kind of clinical trials. Actually, I want to say that those devices are already in practice. So we have long implanted ECG recorders that can collect data for a long period of time, or continuous blood sugar monitors. Usually, these trials generate a huge amount of data because regulators. Because, for example, in these trials, there is what is called device checks, and these device checks can be spread for a long period of time. And regulators want kind of manufacturers to ensure that in this period, device should work properly. So as a result, it's not uncommon to see that regulators may require to collect data for a period of months or even years. So, and if you imagine that every subject has to be recorded data for months or even a year, it can generate huge amount of data. And in this case, in such cases, I think it's going to be extremely difficult to use basically SAS 9, but CAS or Cloud Analytical Service can be a very kind of appropriate choice to handle such big data sets. So as a result of this, we decided to simulate our makeup trial. And again, a couple of very important introductory kind of points, that it's a makeup trial, and the goal to show that CAS can be used in clinical trials. So my statistical analysis is extremely simplified and is not appropriate for example, for real clinical trials. As well, my tables may not meet all standards for SDISC tables, but both statistical analysis and clinical tables are very close to standards. So in our trial, we are going to use data that was generated by Danish researchers they trained an artificial network. So this is a link to where you can get reference and data set itself. So they trained a network based on data that they collected from healthy individuals and patients with type 1 diabetes with 4 levels of glycated hemoglobins, basically level below 6.5, between 6.5% and 7, between 7 and 8, and above 7. So in our study, it's a make study, we have 100 patients with 4 level of glycated hemoglobin, and 2 devices were implanted in each subject. Each device basically measures glucose at the same time, and for 10 days. Again, I want to stress out that maybe 288 times is too much, but 10 days is too short for real clinical trials. So you may have many measurements per day, but much longer kind of period of time in real practice. So And then what we have our statistical analysis and data disposition. So we have basically 576,000 data points, 100 patients per 8 days, per 288 measurements per day per 2 device. And then we have to calculate individual ratio for each of device at every time point on every day for every subject. And after this calculation, what we have to do, we have to calculate average ratio for every data time point with corresponding confidence intervals. So basically, we have to calculate a ratio for, let's say, 8 a.m. for each patient for each day, using data of each patient on every days. And then we have what is called regulatory boundaries interval. So if our confidence intervals is going to be within interval of point A, 1.2, then it means that our devices are equivalent. So let's go to the second. Again, I'm going to single layout. So basically, again, you saw this in the previous demo. So I'm going to terminate my session if my session exists, and then start my session again. And then I'm going to create it all CAS slips I need. And also I want to see my my CAS slip among other SAS libraries. So the next step, we're going to create a table, SDTM demographic table. It's not exactly SDTM table, but it's very close. I want to stress out that this table is better probably generated by Spree. So it's a small, relatively small table with only 100 rows. So we don't need to use CAS in this case. But for demo, for this demo, I decided to use CAS, and the only and to use CAS, I basically this is a SAS 9 code, and I did only small modification. I I wrote this my CAS slip library in addition to the name of table, and by doing this, I actually directed my Viya to use CAS instead of Spree. So let's go. So again, it's 100 pages, and it's very similar to tables I used in real clinical trials. But again, and these tables can be generated with Spree with no problems. Then again, we use a kind of data step to convert this, to use this DM table to generate Adam day cell tables. And it's again, can be done easily with Spree, given the fact that our data sample is relatively small. Yeah, that's it. And again, if you look at my CAS slip libraries, we can see this two tables that were generated. Now we are going to more interesting. First of all, I want to show you, this is data set that was generated by artificial network. So here in the first, this is kind of data set. It has around 40,000 rows. In the first row, we have kind of value from 1 to 4. And one value is for healthy kind of individuals, and the rest values for individuals with diabetes with different level of glycated hemoglobin. So what I'm going to do, first of all, I'm going to use proc procedure to upload this data in CAS. But this data, actually, this data set doesn't have column names. So I have to generate column names, and it's done extremely easy with procast. Basically, I create an empty arrays, and then I do looping. And during my looping, I create name for each of my column and append to my column names. Then I use upload statement to load data, client-side data. And then I use several statements, basically actions, to get information about my uploaded kind of file and table. Let's go and see. So first of all, we have information about tables they uploaded. Now I gave the name SGSM, synthetic glucose continuous monitoring. It has 289 columns and almost 40,000 rows. This is kind of sample of data, and then we have kind of unique value for for the target column. So you see there is 4 discrete numbers. However, I don't need the full tables for my kind of trial. I need a part of these tables. As a result, I have to subset. But what I am doing, I generate a list of random numbers. Again, this is the numbers. And then I select rows that which number corresponds numbers from this random list. So first of all, generate list. Then I select rows with numbers from that list. And because I have to have from this, we should have 100 patients, and we have to 10 days and almost 300 measurements per day for 2 devices. So I did calculation, I need 2,000 rows. So I'm going to subset 200 rows, but I have to select 500 rows from each duplicated kind of level of hemoglobin. So I'm going to write. So basically, again, this is a sample of my subsets and kind of data. And now you see that my sample data has 2,000 rows, and it has 500 rows for each target. Target 1, target 2, target 3, and target 4. Now I'm gonna generate disk LB tables, and I'm gonna do this in part. In the first part, I'm going to generate the first 6 columns, and for this, I'm gonna again use data step in my in CAS. So you see, I generated the first 6 columns, and now my my real data set is quite big. So it's 576,000 rows and 6 columns. Then I'm going to generate another 3 columns, this time columns from my LB table. Oh, sorry. Something. Catch another. Again, it's 3 column, but it's a big. It's 3 column and 576,000 data points, rows. Sorry, and then I'm gonna from my sample data set that I subsetted from a big data sets, I'm gonna create the last 7 columns of my SDTM, sorry, LB table. Then I'm gonna concatenate my 3 parts of my tables vertically or horizontally. So if you see, I got my SDTM LB table, and these tables are usually submitted to regulators. So it's a big tables with with a lot of rows, and usually to generate all this data set, I spent seconds. So the largest time was spent on this tab when I generated a random list and then subset it, and it spent around 6 seconds. So it's very fast. Then I have to generate Adam tables from my SDTM LB tables. And again, I do in 2 parts. The first part, I simply convert columns from SDTM LB tables to Adam LB tables. And then I have to calculate individual ratio for each data point for each subject for each day. And I'm doing there by sorting data in a way that, for example, we have one row, it's a measurement of glucose on for example, first day, 8 a.m. in the morning, in one patient by one device, and the next row is the same day, the same subject, the same time, but the second device. Then the first device, I create a temporary variable nominal where I get kind of glucose concentration, and then I calculate a ratio between the first device using concentration of the first device and the second device, and then I add all other variables needed for my table. So interesting enough, you have, because we have 2 devices in each patient, we have completely, so we have data sets that has 288,000 rows. Then I have concatenate, converted, and derived tables in one ADLB tables. Again, these tables should be submitted as a part of submission for regulators. Now you see the full kind of data set for statistical analysis has almost 1 million rows. And again, it's very fast. So for example, this take 2 seconds. And then I'm going to do statistical analysis, and it's very simple analysis where I'm going to use simple summary action, and I'm going to calculate average kind of a ratio for 2 devices at each time point and with corresponding confidence interval. Let's do this. So you see that it's quite understandable. So that we have, for example, at 0, we have time kind of average ratio of 1.17 and lower and upper confidence interval 1.12 and 1.22. Then I'm going to plot this data to see whether we are within regulatory boundary interval or not. For this, again, because of configuration of our Viya, it's for me better to kind of to transfer this data set from CAS to work library. And then we're going to upload this. So you see that my confidence interval for my devices is outside of regulatory boundary. It means basically that the devices are not equivalent. So, and if we get this result, it means that, for example, this device A cannot be allowed to the market. Yeah, that's it. That's finishes my second demonstration. And yes, so at the end, I want to say that in this webinar, we kind of show how to use cloud analytical services and show that cloud analytical service can be used in clinical trials. They have all functionality and all set of tools that are needed for clinical trials. And that's it.
Thank you very much, Mika. That was a very insightful presentation. I'm looking at any questions and answers that we have at the moment. There's nothing in the Q&A and nothing in the chat. So we have several attendees. If anyone has any questions, do post it in the question and answers or in the chat, and I will have a chance to ask Nikolai. Nikolai, I do have a question. I do have a question for you. Do you think this is where we're moving, that the volume of data for clinical trials will be growing going forward? And what do you think are the main reasons for that?
Yes, because as I mentioned earlier, devices are getting more and more prevalent. And for example, when I spoke of this blood continuous glucose, this device is only part of kind of the whole treatment system, because usually this, for example, blood continuous glucose monitoring are connected to insulin pumps, and these insulin pumps can basically emulate or simulate can achieve total control of blood glucose level in patient, and it's very promising. And it's a huge market because millions of people suffer from diabetes, and with insulin pumps, we can instantly correct blood glucose level. But these trials are extremely difficult. They require a long period of time and a huge amount of data. And we have more and more such devices in practice. I think, yes, it's very promising. And I think it's probably unavoidable to handle, for example, such trials without tools that can manage large data sets.
Okay, that makes sense. Paul, I allowed your microphone if you would like to ask the question.
Yes. Yes. I noticed that in pharma now, real-world evidence is also trying or being used as well in clinical trials. So your demonstration is illustrating that, I think. That means that the data volumes are going up, and that using an in-memory engine can be a good thing to speed up analysis. And so that's indeed something that you demonstrated. You saw that we used CAS actions to do stratified sampling. That's something you did. But there are also many analytical techniques. And do you think that CAS is specialized in prediction and predictive modeling? That's where most of the use cases lie in CAS for machine learning and so on. Do you think that there are also for statistical inference and clinical trials, that there are also good examples or use cases where we can use CAS and CAS actions?
Yeah, the problem here, it's not only kind of, unfortunately, initially when I kind of worked on my this webinar, I used more sophisticated tools, but unfortunately, we have old version of our SAS Viya, and in new versions there is all statistical procedures, and all in this procedures are fully functional for clinical trials. But in old version, as in our case, unfortunately, I couldn't use, for example, mixed model in this webinar because we don't have this functionality in our Viya. But in modern version, yes, this functionality is present and can be used easily. Yeah. SAS can be completely used.
And I think, if you don't mind me contributing to the answer, thank you, Nikolai, is also, Paul is working for SAS, and SAS is investing heavily in CAS. What Nikolai is saying, that indeed this was done on a Viya 3.5, the demo environment that we currently have access to, but Viya 4 that contains the latest version of CAS has new features added to it with every other release on the Viya 4. That's where the future is, and the use cases on CAS for modeling, data science modeling, are growing with every day and every release. The capabilities of CAS are constantly growing, and no doubt with time that use cases that you mentioned, Paul, will be more and more applicable. The other question is, would the clinical research organization and regulators be comfortable using machine learning for clinical trials? But that's not a technical question.
And for example, in this kind of SAS, we don't have like mixed models, but we don't have LS mean statement. So I can't kind of discern LS means from my kind of statistical model. That's why I decided to use simple statistics set.
Paul, does that answer your question? Would you like to contribute anything to that?
No, yeah, right, it does. Yeah. I just wrote in the chat that you do have PROC-L mixed, but it's for mixed models, for calculating mixed models, and it can help you to benefit from the CAS engine and the in-memory engine to process large amounts of data and create mixed models based on that. But it's a new procedure that is CAS enabled and might not have all the statements that PROC mixed has. So indeed, it's sometimes an effort to start using the new procedures like PROC gen select, PROC reg select. These are for logistic regression, linear regression, and mixed models is L mixed. Are several of those new procedures that you can use. And we also have Bayesian analysis, causal analysis. These are new techniques that can also be applied, I guess, in clinical trials.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Paul, for a very good question.
You're welcome.
I have another question from Abdul Qadir, if I read this out. Now SAS can be installed on both Azure and AWS, same way SAS Viya can be installed on either of clouds, or it requires SAS custom cloud. Abdul Qadir, SAS, I can answer this one. It's a bit more on the technical side. SAS Viya can be installed on AWS, on Azure, as well as GCP, and can be installed on-premise. They support the deployment of SAS supports deployment on all of the 4 deployments. On-premise have to be installed using OpenShift, which is a different type of technology, and it supports the Kubernetes. The deployment process for each or any of the clouds slightly different, just slightly. It comes down to some of the options that you use in Terraform scripts, but it isn't a huge difference out there. Also, community has demonstrated many times that SAS Viya, being a Kubernetes and Docker software, can be installed in a variety of other installations. People have installed it on an open source Kubernetes without OpenShift, using a bare bones hardware, and in a variety of other architectures. Just important part to note that SAS does not support any of those other ones, but nevertheless, it can be installed and deployed on it. Hopefully that answers your question. Let me see if I have any other questions. I don't have any other questions, and we are pretty much run out of time, 1 minute past. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for attendees for finding the time and joining the call. Thank you for very good questions. And Mikola, thank you very much for all your effort preparing the presentation, doing excellent demos, walking us through the slides. Thank you very much.